A warning to our listeners. Violence and sex are discussed in this episode.
Did you check around those trees? I can go check around those trees.
Yeah, I went all the way down this road.
We went looking for Desiree on a late October afternoon. Reporter Karen Florin and I decided to meet in Norwich. That much we knew about Desiree. She was in Norwich, though we didn't know exactly where.
Under the tree, you think? Or near the tree?
We had reached out to her mother and sister. Her sister finally agreed to help us find her.
Tina? Hi, Karen Florin.
When Karen and Desiree's sister arrived, we started looking. Leaves covered much of the ground of St. Mary's Cemetery, making it hard to find the grave marker. From the Day in New London, Connecticut, this is Case Unsolved. I'm Carlos Virgen. Our research into cold cases in southeastern Connecticut started with a list compiled by the state's cold case unit. That unit was disbanded in 2016 because of a lack of funding. On the list were cases dated from 1979 to 2008. Shootings, strangulations, arsons, and beatings. All investigated, all unsolved. We searched our newsroom library. We looked through files stuffed with yellowing newspaper clippings for each case. There were 2 files for Desiree Michaud. One article written in 1985 on the 1-year anniversary of her death caught our attention. Freelance reporter Susan Zakin wrote in great detail about Desiree's life, from growing up in Plainfield to working as a prostitute in New London. One paragraph read, Desiree Michaud is buried in an unmarked grave in St. Mary's Cemetery in Norwich, the old manufacturing city where she was born June 29, 1965. Her mother, Diane Greenwood Serrano, said she could not afford a headstone. So not only was her 1984 murder unsolved, it seemed that Desiree Michaud had been forgotten. We went looking for her, or remnants of her. We talked to her sister. We knocked on the door of her former pimp. We located a former prostitute who worked the streets with her. And we walked that cemetery in Norwich. Solving the case was never our intention, but we did find out more about how she lived and how she died. Here's reporter Karen Florin.
In all my years of reporting on murders and cold cases, I've heard about Desiree Michaud, but I never knew a lot of the details about her death. And when I started investigating, I was intrigued because she would have been my exact same age, for one. And during the time when she was out on the streets prostituting, I was going away to college and having the time of my life. And we had done some really good reporting on it and had a story about her talent as a painter and her pure, raw beauty. She had this dark hair and these very light blue eyes and was just gorgeous. So I was intrigued and wanted to learn some more about it.
From previous reporting by the Day, we had names of family, friends, and people involved in the murder investigation. Karen went about making calls and asking her sources in law enforcement and the court system if they recalled Desiree's murder or remembered her when she was alive.
You start off with just some basic tools of, a person's name and go on to Nexus, go on to all the resources that you have and look for where they live. And we found what we thought was a good address for her mother and went to her house one day.
Hi, my name's Karen Florin. I'm trying to find Diane.
I'm Diane.
Are you Diane? Are you the mother of Desiree Michaud?
Yeah.
I'm from the New London Day. I wondered if you'd take some time and talk to us about her case.
After all this time,
She was not rude, but
I
firm.
can't talk about her or anything that's very depressing. You understand? I've gone through this before. Other people have tried to get me and my daughter. They wanted to do a TV show and all kinds of stuff. I can't do it. All right?
While Desiree's mother was hesitant to talk to us that day, she did help us get in touch with her other daughter, Tina Robb. And after various phone calls and attempts to schedule a meeting, Tina finally agreed to meet with us in Norwich.
Carlos, nice to meet you.
So Tina was very hesitant to talk to us and kept telling us over and over that she really didn't remember much and that she didn't want to talk about it. Yet she was, you got the feeling that she did really have something to say and would like to see some resolution in her sister's death. She described being close to her sister when they were both kids.
Well, my mother said we were very close. I don't remember anything. I know we all hung out together, but like I said, I don't remember much.
We kept telling her we didn't want her, to be re-traumatized, but as she continued talking about it, she seemed to remember a little bit more and seemed to be more comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, we went through a lot, and growing up, at that point, my sister was like 4 years old. I was 7. She was 7. I was 9. So we were very young.
And she spilled her guts a little bit, really, on how they had both been sexually assaulted as children.
We have one story that says that your sister was sexually assaulted as a little kid.
She was, yeah, from 4 up.
When Desiree moved out, it seems like they lost touch for a number of years and maybe saw each other only occasionally.
I was told probably a lot got blocked out. That's why I don't remember nothing.
Are you interested in remembering or no? You're
Nope.
better, you're happy you're not knowing?
No, I don't want, I don't even want to know. I mean, I cope with things my own way.
Desiree left home to live with relatives at a very early age. She went from relative to relative, and when that didn't work out, she ended up in New London, on the streets.
So I was sort of doing what reporters do and ask just about anybody who would have been around in New London, did they know Desiree Michaud? And one day I was talking to Bill Bingham, a lawyer who was around back then, and I said, did you know Desiree Michaud? And he said, no, but I know Cindy Griffin, and Cindy Griffin knew her well.
I was a cheerleader in school, all-American girl.
Cindy Griffin, a former prostitute, worked Bank Street with Desiree in the early 80s.
Got out of school. Instead of going to college, I went to the one of Hard Knocks.
So Cindy and Desiree had been working the streets together at least in the weeks, probably in the months before Desiree was killed. And Cindy would talk about Desiree being a little bit different and a little bit, better dressed and maybe perhaps more articulate and educated and in some sense more refined than the others who were out there.
She would wear like conservative clothes. She didn't dress like a hooker. She was very conservative. And she was really quiet. She wasn't, out of all the girls I know, I think she was like the quietest one I've ever met, and that interested me. How could someone that's so shy, be available to men that ask practically anything?
Cindy knew all about Desiree's artwork, had seen some of her artwork, and sort of raved about it.
She was one of the most talented persons I can think of, or back then on the street. She was an artist, and when I say an artist, she didn't draw stick figures. This girl should have been in museums. That's how beautiful her work was.
Desiree, the prostitute, worked the streets of downtown New London, including Bank Street and the side streets around what was then called the Hygienic restaurant. Desiree, the artist, had her art displayed in the annual art exhibition at the Hygienic. She was talented and had shown promise as an artist. At 14, she won a scholarship to a summer arts program at Wesleyan University. While she was serving a sentence at the York Correctional Facility in East Lyme, she painted a mural called Hands that depicted two pairs of hands reaching towards each other. The mural has long since been painted over, but some people still remember her artwork.
One of the only pictures that we've seen of Desiree is a picture that was published in the newspaper along with a story about her, in which she's shown with looking much older than her age, really. She's shown with long dark hair, a very fair skin, light eyes, and she's wearing a lace top. So she looks very beautiful, but older than her years, just striking.
She had a presence of some kind. There was a vitality to this person.
Peter Solari is a retired public defender.
When I was looking for people that might know something about Desiree, I thought, let me try Peter, because he was around for more than 30 years, working in the court system. And to my surprise, he said, yes, I do remember her, actually.
And here she is, she's this kid, where you would say, who is that? What was going on there, you know? And so, as I said before, to use that word again, you know, there was some, you know, urgency about her. There was something, you know, she was full of life. And is it probably true that had Sally Smith or Brenda Brown been murdered in a compass of several weeks after I represented her, would I remember them as well? Yeah, probably so. And would I say basically the same thing? Gosh, they were full of life. What 18-year-old isn't full of life? But this is how she struck me. Everybody's carrying around some kind of stereotype, some kind of shorthand of what someone charged with these kinds of offenses, a sex worker, is like. And so to the degree to which Desiree did not fit that shorthand, that stereotype, it would, you know, be something you might recall.
He talked in general about the number of cases that the court handled on a daily basis. So I got the picture that every morning there would be at least a handful of people who had been charged with prostitution, and that, you know, some of the cases were easier to deal with than others, but that the goal at the courthouse at that time was really to get these cases resolved as soon as possible, perhaps by collecting a fine. It appears that Desiree was convicted, and she did spend some time in prison, and additionally, she also probably paid fines for the crime of prostitution.
We were all kind of disgusted that we had gotten into it, you know.
Again, Cindy Griffin.
Some of the girls enjoyed the action and the excitement of it. And then the money, of course, if he had someone decent to go with and could depend on him. But that's why I couldn't understand why she didn't make it ahead of all of us, or maybe she would have had she still been around. I thought that she would... Excuse me.
It's okay.
I thought that she would be one of the girls that would settle down, get out of the lifestyle. Desiree always thought she was going to get out of that lifestyle and really be something. And I said, those paintings belong in the Smithsonian. I said, you are one hell of a artist, you know. I said, and every time I go by the Hygienic and I see the paintings of the naked ladies, I laugh to myself and say, man, you could have done better than that.
The naked ladies are part of a 3-story mural that can be seen today on the side of the Hygienic. a building whose transformation is emblematic of the changes that have taken place in New London. In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the Hygienic restaurant was a popular place where one could find city leaders, downtown merchants, and cops getting a bite to eat. But by the 80s, it had fallen on hard times. Its main business seems to have shifted to feeding the prostitutes who walked Bank Street. According to a story in The Day from around that time, quote, the restaurant's clientele increasingly had become the down and out more than the up and coming, end quote. By 1985, it had closed. No one seemed to mind, although many worried about the future of the annual art show that had been held there for the previous 6 years. But the Anything Goes art show continued, and in the 1990s, a group of local artists took over the building, converting it into a gallery and apartments for artists. Today, some of the bars and tattoo parlors remain on Bank Street, but they are now interspersed with empty storefronts, cafes, bars serving craft beers and cocktails, and hip eateries. The prostitutes are gone, or at least they're not as visible or as brazen as the one who approached Detective Mike Lewin and some of his fellow police officers back in 1984.
John, Billy, and myself were standing on a corner of Bank and Golden Street. And I assumed it was a prostitute. And she says, "Are you guys cops?" I said, "No, we're not cops." Even though we got on like sport coats and dress shirts and ties. And Billy says to her, "Well, cops wouldn't wear shoes like this." And he had like gray suede shoes were kind of popular at the time. And she says, "That's true. Hey, you want a date? What do you mean date? Well, you want to have sex for $25? And he ends up pinching her.
Bank Street, as it has today, had a lot of bars back then and was a popular spot for people in the Navy and was a little bit wilder over the years than it is now. And there was what's called a stroll for prostitutes. So they would stroll around a block on Bank Street and wait for cars to go by and pick them up for a trick. And they could probably do all of their commerce there on Bank Street, right? So they get the money from the trick and use the money, then turn around and use it to buy drugs. So everything they probably wanted was available right within a little area of downtown New London.
Heroin was flooding the city, and then that crack cocaine came along, and it just all it did was add to the prostitution.
I've heard from police and from people who have followed this community of prostitutes that everybody who's out there turning tricks and selling sex for money is doing it because they're addicted to drugs. So we have heard that Desiree had used both crack and heroin, and that wouldn't surprise me at all.
She was doing heroin, but she didn't appear to be like someone that was addicted, you know what I mean? We let ourselves go and stuff like that when we got into that. And her habit wasn't enormous. She had one, but it wasn't enormous, like I look like I've been under a sewing needle, it's all up and down my arms and on my legs and everywhere else.
A woman would never know when she got into a car whether it would be somebody who treated her relatively well or somebody who was violent.
He said he wanted to do it outside. So went out and went around the back of his car, and then he just bent me over the car, and he's trying to rape me.
Cindy described being beaten and assaulted many times.
He reaches under a seat, he grabs me by the back of the head, and he's got a knife to my throat. And he says, you're going to do what I say. And I said, I'm going to die. I'm really going to die,
And her frustration because the police didn't seem to be as interested because she was a prostitute.
I screamed and screamed and screamed, and somebody finally called the police. And when the police got there, the guy did something, I don't know where it went to or whatever, but I don't think they did a thorough check of his car, nor did they care because I was a prostitute. And they just made him go his way and myself go, in the opposite direction. And I was scared the whole way home.
Now, Desiree had been sexually assaulted, and actually there was an arrest made of a man, and the case went to trial. Now, I've seen this before in my court reporting. A woman who's a prostitute is sort of seen as a dubious witness, right? So people are going to doubt what she says because she's a prostitute. She has sex with people for money. And I think people have trouble distinguishing between willingly having sex with somebody for money and forcefully having sex with somebody that you set out to willingly have sex with, right? So it's a troubling thing for people to wrap their minds around. She, from what we can find out, somebody was arrested. Somebody took her out to Salem and sexually assaulted her and was arrested. And by the time the trial came up, I think she was incarcerated. I think she did testify at the trial, and the person was found not guilty. So during this time, it was really when AIDS was, in its full fury.
I'm still living with HIV, and most of the girl, it went around to everybody.
Cindy said just about everybody that was working out on the streets was getting AIDS at that time.
Holly, and then there was Mavis, and there was Jay.
In those days, it was like a death sentence. You get this virus, and so many people died from it.
It was in that environment that Desiree found herself in New London, involved in the sex trade with all of its entanglements, drugs, disease, and violence. Like the other prostitutes, she walked the downtown streets looking for Johns and was taken to parked cars or motels in Waterford and Groton. It was on Bank Street in downtown New London where she was last seen.
She was the type of girl that never let people know where she was going. When she came back, she'd discuss it and stuff like that. But one day she took off, and it was in the evening, and she never came back.
If you have a tip about Desiree Michaud's murder, please contact the Groton Town Police at 860-441-6716 or the New London State's Attorney's Office at 860-443-2835. On next week's episode, two retired detectives describe the crime scene and murder investigation.
It was a typical motel room that somebody was living
There were
in.
clothes on the floor, there was a towel on the floor, there was a knife laying on the floor.
We interviewed a lot of people.
It was Detective Morton who took a woman who had been staying in a neighboring room for hypnosis.
Describe the sound.
Sounds like a body being thrown. Because an object has a hollow sound, and a body makes a bump.
If you have any comment about our podcast series, please email us at caseunsolved@theday.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Case Unsolved on your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to rate the show. If you'd like to join the discussion about the podcast and to get previews and a behind-the-scenes look at the series, join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Case Unsolved. Case Unsolved is produced by Peter Wappy and me, Carlos Virgen. Reporting was done by Karen Florin. Editing and audio mixing by Peter Wappy. Tim Cotter is executive producer, and Sassy Larinetta is associate producer. I produce the music used in the series. This has been a production of The Day in New London, Connecticut.